Imagine the worst kind of punishment, one where pain doesn't end in seconds, but in hours, death by 1,000 cuts. A civilization where they perfected the art of terror, the ultimate punishment, slow, agonizing, famously known as Lingchi. But was Lingchi truly about justice or a display of absolute power? Welcome to the infamous past, where we explore the darkest chapters of human history. Imperial China. Ancient China's history is a history of war, violence, and strict legal systems that often enforced brutal punishments. For centuries, China was divided into separate kingdoms, each fighting for supremacy. This period, known as the Warring States period, ended when Qin Shi Huang conquered all rival states and unified China for the first time in 221 BC. Qin Shi Huang was a ruthless ruler who centralized power, standardized writing, currency, and measurements, and began construction of the Great Wall of China. However, his rule was also marked by extreme brutality. He imposed harsh laws where even minor offenses could lead to severe punishment. He burned books and buried scholars alive. After the fall of the Qin in 206 BC, the Han dynasty emerged, ushering in a more Confucian-based system of law. Confucianism emphasized kindness, morality, and a ruler's duty to lead by virtue as opposed to fear, but severe punishment still remained a cornerstone of the ancient Chinese justice system. Several emperors were infamous for their cruelty. Emperor Yang Sui was known for mass executions and forcing millions into brutal forced labor on the Grand Canal, while Emperor Shizong massacred his concubines and their families en masse. Ancient China's rulers used a combination of military power, strict laws, and brutal punishment to maintain order. While their legacy includes many great achievements, the long line of merciless rulers made ancient Chinese justice one of the most feared in history. Public shaming. Ancient China employed various forms of psychological torture to instill fear, break the will of offenders, and maintain strict social order. Unlike physical torment, which left visible wounds, psychological torture inflicted long-lasting mental scars while often leaving no physical evidence. These methods were particularly effective in punishing minor criminals and preventing dissent. One of the most notorious forms of psychological punishment was the Cangue, a heavy wooden collar locked around a prisoner's neck. This device was not only cumbersome, but also prevented basic movements such as eating, drinking, or lying down properly. Prisoners were often paraded through towns or forced to stand for days in public squares, where they endured ridicule and humiliation from passers-by. The sheer weight of the Cangue caused excruciating neck and shoulder pain, but the worst part was the shame. Criminals were left exposed and humiliated in front of their community, sometimes with their offenses written on the Cangue for all to see. Some even starved to death if no one took pity on them. Another insidious method of psychological torment was tickle torture, which sounds harmless, but was anything but inflicting unbearable distress. Victims were restrained and tickled relentlessly, often with feathers or soft brushes on their feet, ribs, or armpits. Though it caused no lasting injury and was often accompanied by laughter, tickle torture was incredibly uncomfortable and could lead to serious mental distress. The overwhelming distress could break a person mentally, reducing them to hysterical fits or total submission. Additionally, criminal tattooing was a punishment that ensured lifelong shame. Prisoners were forcibly tattooed on their faces, foreheads, or arms with characters marking them as thieves, traitors, or rebels. These permanent symbols branded them as outcasts, barring them from work, marriage, and social reintegration. Zanzhi. In ancient China, confession was a crucial part of the legal system, as a person could not be officially convicted of a crime unless they admitted guilt. This led to the widespread use of torture to force confessions, and one of the most notorious methods was Zanzhi. Zanzhi involved placing a prisoner's fingers between small wooden or bamboo sticks, which were then tied together with cords. The cords were gradually tightened, crushing the fingers with increasing pressure. As the device was tightened further, bones fractured, fingernails split, and nerves were permanently damaged, leaving victims in agonizing pain. Because the goal was confession rather than execution, the torture was applied slowly and progressively, ensuring maximum psychological and physical suffering. The mere threat of Zanzhi was often enough to force confessions. Many confessed before the device had been used, preferring to be quickly executed than to endure hours of torture, which would still result in their eventual death. Zanzhi was a punishment usually reserved for women, while men were subject to the jiagan, a similar device which was used on the feet and ankles as opposed to the fingers. The jiagan tended to be reserved for those who had committed robbery or murder. Those under the age of 15 were exempt from the punishment. Amputation. Ancient China's legal system relied on severe physical punishments designed to both cripple criminals and permanently mark them with shame. Among the most brutal of these were Yi, Yue, and Gong, each ensuring that the offender would suffer for life, both physically and socially, if they managed to survive the ordeal. These punishments were used to permanently brand the victims as criminals so that, no matter where they went, the shame of their crimes would follow them, and they would never be capable of living a full, independent life. Yi, or rhinotomy, involved cutting off a criminal's nose. This punishment was often inflicted for crimes such as theft, disobeying the emperor's orders, or rape. It left the offender horribly disfigured and instantly recognizable as a criminal. For more severe offenses, the punishment of yui, or foot amputation, was administered. Criminals who were found guilty of desertion, theft, or committing fraud against the royal courts often faced the loss of one or both feet. This left them crippled, unable to work, and entirely dependent on others for survival. Unlike execution, which ended suffering swiftly, Yui condemned most of its victims to a lifetime of hardship, humiliation, and exclusion from society, one which might end in total destitution, especially if their family were not willing or able to care for them. Even more feared was Gong, or castration, a punishment reserved for the most serious crimes. Castration involved the complete removal of both the penis and testicles, rendering the victim incapable of fathering children. Many castrated men were forced to become eunuchs in imperial service. Some eunuchs could achieve considerable influence, but were never truly respected and would spend their lives confined to the emperor's household. Stripped of both their manhood and their social status, they were regarded as less than human, living out their days in a state of humiliation. Lingchi. Lingchi, or death by 1,000 cuts, was one of the most infamous and brutal execution methods in ancient China. Used from the 10th century AD until its official abolition in 1905, it was reserved for the most serious of offenses, such as crimes committed against the emperor. More than just an execution, Lingchi was designed to be a slow, agonizing, and psychologically tormenting death, meant to instill absolute terror in both the victim and the public. The punishment was intended to break a person completely, physically, mentally, and even spiritually. The condemned person was tied to a wooden frame, often in a public square, where crowds gathered to witness the spectacle. The executioner, skilled in prolonging suffering, would begin by making small incisions. Gradually, more flesh was sliced away until muscle and bone was exposed. During the Yuan dynasty, the executioner would inflict 100 separate wounds, while during the Ming dynasty, there were cases where victims suffered 3,000. The suffering was compounded by the horror of onlookers, as the victim's pain became a gruesome public spectacle, meant to serve as a deterrent to any would-be traitors. Beyond the unimaginable physical pain, Lingchi carried deep spiritual and psychological terror. In traditional Chinese Confucian belief, the body was sacred, and mutilation after death prevented the soul from resting or reincarnating. This meant that Lingchi was not only a method of execution, but also eternal punishment, denying the victim peace, even in the afterlife. Though officially outlawed in 1905, Lingchi did not entirely disappear. The last recorded case occurred in 1936, when a captured Chinese communist soldier was subjected to Lingchi by the ruling nationalist troops. This act, occurring amidst the chaos and bloodshed of China's bloody civil war, marked the final chapter of a punishment that had lasted for over a millennium and had claimed thousands of victims. In the early 20th century, the Republic of China sought to modernize its legal system, and many of the extreme laws and punishments of the past were abolished, and practices like Lingchi, mutilation, and public shaming were replaced with more standardized punishments. Despite this, the new laws could not be consistently enforced in all of China, and so many relics of the old imperial dynasties continued. Yet, while these acts may seem like relics of history, government-sanctioned torture still occurs in China today. Dissidents, activists, and groups like the Uyghur Muslims face forced labor, torture, and psychological torment at the hands of the state. These methods serve the same purpose as those of the past: to instill fear, crush opposition, and maintain control. If you found this video informative, hit the like button, share, and subscribe for more interesting videos from the past.